here in Atlanta. I keep wanting to say Atlantic City, but
wow,
our next guest is very familiar with Atlantic City. He's done a lot of work down there and is always at the Super Bowl. Leigh Steinberg is a fixture at this event. He's got clients galore and also does great charity work. And it's good to have you back on the show and see you again. And, you know, I keep saying Atlantic City because you've done a lot of stuff associated with the city and in the city with the Maxwells and other great things.
So the Maxwells have been a lot of fun. They gave me an award as Legend of Football several years ago, and then we do a humanitarian award based on philanthropic service that we'll give on Saturday at our Super Bowl party, and it'll go to Mark Davis and Matt Nagy of Chicago, and John Schneider, the GM of the Seahawks, and Nick Lowry, and Steve Bartkowski was my first client. So
that's the second Bartkowski reference.
That's two references of Steve on this show today.
So I started my career. That was my first client. And
Cal Berkeley, right?
Yes,
You went to Berkeley.
Yes, it was 1970.
That's your first ever client?
I was a dorm counselor in an undergrad dorm, and they moved the freshman football team into the dorm. There really wasn't any sports agency back then. Teams could just slam the phone down and say they didn't deal with agents. And so in 1975, I was out of law school. I was traveled the world. I was ready to choose between job offers, and here the first pick in the first round of the draft asked me to represent them, and we got the largest rookie contract in NFL history because there was a World Football League competing against the NFL, and we get to Atlanta. And I've grown up in laid-back Los Angeles and been at Berkeley. So we arrive, and there are Klieg lights at the airport flashing in the sky. There's a huge crowd pressed up against the police line, and the very first thing we hear is, "We interrupt the Johnny Carson show to bring you a special news bulletin. Steve Bartkowski and his attorney Leigh Steinberg have just arrived at the airport. We switch you live." So that was
like
really
the LaFonta Heights or something.
That's really was a revelation and a key moment because I saw what athletes could be and started the role modeling philosophy. But what we're doing is we've given the Maxwell Award in Atlantic City at the banquet for the last 2 years. We've given our Steinberg with Cosmo De Nicola. So we gave it to Connor Barwin. And it happened that we were giving it to him, and then he got released.
Yeah.
And then we gave it to Chris Long, who's really amazing. And
played for free.
He
donated his whole check.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I represented his father, but I was out of the business a few years when Chris came along. But oh my God, what an incredible figure! But I spent my whole time. Boardwalk Empire had been on the air, and I spent my whole time looking for Nucky. And never found him.
Nucky Thompson, yes. Leigh, you were talking to us before during the break, and it's basically you don't take just any client. You do a lot of vetting and research about the type of people you want to represent. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So it's all about values, and so you want an athlete for whom money is important, but not everything, and you want someone with a good heart, who understands the immense power that football has to create idolatry and role models. And so we ask the players to retrace their roots to the high school, collegiate, and professional community and set up programs that enhance the quality of life. So there are athletes out there who at a young age have more of a social conscience, who have a sense of wanting to leave a legacy, and they're going to be great in second career, and that also augurs well for them in their football or baseball or basketball careers. So when I looked at somebody like Patrick Mahomes, I'm looking at the fact his parents raised him to have good values. If you like him on the field, you'll like him even more off the field. Mm-hmm. And you're looking for people like that, where he spends his off days painting a house for veterans or going to a children's hospital.
I got to ask you, because the Eagles are in a very interesting scenario, and you being one of the best, most well-known, most renowned agents out there, would you enjoy being the agent for Nick Foles right now? I mean, what kind of scenario does his agent have up against him right now? Is this a good position to be in? Does he have some hand in this?
I think that when you have the quarterback position, everything's different because the centrality of that player is different. And he's done so much for the Eagles that were he to request to be in one situation or another, what he has is an amazing record of performing under pressure. And when you think about a franchise quarterback, you're thinking about someone that a team can build around for 10 to 12 years, someone that they can win because of rather than with, and someone who, in critical situations, it's adverse. You've thrown 2 interceptions. The team is looking at you like you're on hallucinogenics. The crowd is booing. Now what do? Can you elevate your level of play,
right.
Compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind? And I think the player we didn't get in recruiting was Carson Wentz, and we thought that he was going to be a Mahomes-type quarterback, and I still believe he will. So they've got their franchise quarterback, and they've got this amazing luxury, and they've needed Nick Foles,
right,
for a couple of years. They don't have someone that they just brought off of practice squad. They've got someone who can actually win playoff games.
How tricky is this going to be for the Eagles? Because obviously there's a $20 million contract payment with mutual options. There's deadline dates with regards to the league year and all these things. There's a small window, I guess, for the Eagles where they could trade him, but it's got to be difficult, right?
So Foles has a $20 million contract for next year?
Yes.
It's a mutual option. The Eagles have to pick it up, and then he would have to accept it. But then there's
if he declines it, he pays them back $2 million
to get out of it.
Yeah.
Or they can franchise him and then try to trade him. But you can't franchise a backup quarterback, can you?
Sure you can. The franchise tag was specifically put in because owners feared they lose their quarterbacks. And what you've seen in Philadelphia is that they've needed both.
Yeah.
So one of the real downsides of the cap is because you pay the star player so much money, a great preponderance of the squad's playing at the minimum. So you no longer go from an A starter to a A minus. You go from an A starter to a B,
like a C.
B minus,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Players are playing for the minimum. So that position where half of the teams only keep 2, to me is the most ridiculous thing they do, because you cannot win in contemporary football without a quarterback that can deliver. And without that, you're just lost.
Yeah, it's in a weird spot because they have a mutual option. So if you're his agent, are you advising him to opt into that deal and take the $20 million and just be the backup at $20 million, or are you trying to pay your way to get to the $25 million potentially, or put yourself out on the open market where maybe you don't get $20 or $25 million?
So you'd have to make a deal with the Eagles that you could explore the market so you can answer those questions, and so you'd be sure that a team you were traded to would pick up that contract, or that on the open market. And remember what happens in free agency. Generally, it takes B-plus players and gives them A-plus contracts, because the best players never get out into free agency. So
they're always overvalued in free agency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. First of all, the Eagles need him. In other words, what would they have done if they had gone to,
Nate Sudfeld,
or some rookie or something like that? I mean, they don't win the Super Bowl. So and they don't come close to being in the playoffs this way without him. So you have to sit with Foles as his agent and say, tell me what's most important to you. Short-term economic gain, long-term economic security, being a starter, profile. And if his aspiration is still to be a starter, then the economics will flow from there. So whatever deal you start out taking, if you can lock that starting job down, I mean, this market's going to $30 million a quarterback.
Yeah, just real quick, it's the Eagles must exercise 1 week after the Super Bowl. Foles has 5 days after the Eagles' decision to exercise. If he declines, he must pay back $2 million of his 18 bonus. His salary fully guarantees on March 18th.
And if they decline,
well, then he's if they decline 5 days after the Super Bowl, he's
a free agent, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the point there is, as you asked what I would do as an agent, you need to have the most information possible. Which teams could he start for?
And are they calling you now, Leigh? If he's available, we would be
like
interested.
Jacksonville, let's say, or somebody.
As long as you're keeping their confidence, yes.
Which, of course, Leigh would.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Well, we know it's New York and Washington, and
So the point is if they'll. So you could see Foles going to a place where he started a couple of years and you park a young quarterback behind him, right?
Mm-hmm.
He could be a perfect fit that way. I mean, look at who Denver's playing
Case Keenum
as their starting quarterback. And so I want the most information possible if I'm Foles' agent. I want to know which teams need quarterbacks, what they're willing to pay, and be able to assess that to decide. Now, if I want to know it anyway, because if we're going off to free agency, there's a whole lot of discussion that goes on, notwithstanding the rules. Oops, did I say that? There's a whole lot of discussion that's going to go on behind the scenes as to where he should go.
The great Leigh Steinberg spending some time with us here at Super Bowl 53 Radio Row. And Leigh, you talked about Carson Wentz and that you and your group had interest in Carson. Give us the overwhelming thing that stood out about Carson to you, and thus had you wanting him.
Carson Wentz is a man. He's preternaturally mature. He's in command. He has terrific arm strength. He also has the ability to scramble. But he has the type of mind that and the type of presence that it's not going to take a long time for him to be a big star, and it didn't. We thought, of all the quarterbacks that come out of school the last 5 years, we thought the two best were Carson Wentz and Pat Mahomes. And so I still think Carson Wentz has a destiny. Injury has sidelined it, but he would have probably won MVP, not this last season, but the year before. And they've solved that problem. If you don't solve that problem, you can go years without ever doing it. So they've got their number one guy. Now the question is, do they think he is injury prone? Do they think... But it's all chance. So.
Right, and these are interesting. Like, this is why, man, we could talk for 4 hours with Leigh here about, you're negotiating with the team and you're saying, come on, Leigh, he's hurt all the time. I mean, I'm sure you go through these type of conversations all the time.
Yes, and my response to that is, gee, fellas, he wasn't hurt hang gliding. He wasn't hurt snorkeling at Club Med. He was hurt doing just what you wanted him to do, which is to commit his body and mind with reckless abandon to help your team win. And so...
He has the answer
right
there.
There it is, right there.
So what about,
he's not out at the clubs. You know what I mean? Like, he's not a guy that's ever going to put himself in that kind of harm's way.
I find these, because you mentioned your B-plus players get the A-plus contract.
In free agency. Yeah.
But what about the veteran, the Brandon Graham, who's 30 years old or 31, and he's at the end of the line? Those got to be tricky negotiations, too, when you're dealing with sentimental value against actual value.
So,
and then what kind of market is he going to have in another place?
So this is where players sometimes can be stubborn because they feel with their incumbent team. I had Bruce Smith and Thurman Thomas that were both offered at the end of their careers to stay with Buffalo for reduced salaries. They didn't have it in them to do it. And they
take less.
They knew that they might take less somewhere else. They didn't care. They wanted a place that they thought valued them, at a high rate. And so there's a pride factor there, where many times, that's where you hit the player pride principle and being pragmatic. Did somebody talk to Le'Veon Bell about the fact that you cannot replicate $14 million and that we're playing tackle football instead of croquet?
Right. Because even if you get that big contract next year, you still lost $14
You're
million.
$14 million down.
Definitely.
You need $14 million more to replicate it, but you've also lost one irreplaceable season, and you're playing running back.
Yes.
Now, That's a classic lose-lose.
You wouldn't have advised him to sit out the season.
I wouldn't, but I sure wouldn't advise Pittsburgh to play it that way because they played it like that a guarantee would kill him. Now look at Todd Gurley with the Rams, who was maybe a year younger or two. He got a guaranteed contract.
Mm-hmm.
So the point was not the money, it was the guarantee. And that's this whole concept that running backs are modular, fungible. You can find them in the third round. They
Right.
wear out really quickly. But guess what? Pittsburgh would have been significantly better with Le'Veon Bell.
No question about it.
You know, getting all excited about Connor was fine. But there's only a few of them. It's like the Raiders trading Khalil Mack. You know, there's only a few of these special players, and if you got one, lock them down.
Yeah, when you're asking Leigh about the veteran guy who might be looking for that one last deal, does he stay with his current club?
Yeah.
Leigh goes, Bruce Smith, I'm going to call Dan Snyder. We're going to get a nice check out of Dan Snyder. You got
That is great.
that's the speed dial. Let's call
There's
Dan.
always Washington.
And by the way, Leigh is always in town for Leigh Steinberg's 31.
32nd Super Bowl party.
32.
So we give humanitarian awards as we talked about earlier. We're also doing a virtual reality display where you can be Patrick Mahomes, face what he faces on defense and get that visceral feeling. We have a live hookup between the party and our troops in the field in Afghanistan because we want to be time, place sensitive. And lastly, we're doing a brain health concussion summit.
Awesome.
To explore that issue.
By the way, Dave Sills, what round?
If he runs fast enough, he could be a first rounder. If he runs fast
Mr.
enough.
WVU.
He'll be
over
on the
here.
show tomorrow.
Yeah,
I
there
look
you
forward
go.
to it.
Well, one last thing. How did Mahomes, no any disrespect to Texas Tech, but a guy that's that good, I'm thinking would go even bigger than that. How did he end up at Texas Tech, real quick?
It was a team that wanted him. He was comfortable with a little lower key experience. He wasn't really Alabama, SC, Ohio State type guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Cliff Kingsbury was the magic factor because he had a quarterback whisperer.
There you go.
Leigh, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
When you come back to Atlantic City, we'll have to talk again.
Yeah, I'll see you in a month or two.
Great. Yeah,
you
we'll
go.
talk to him then. All right, it's a great super agent, Leigh Steinberg, here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN.